NewsRap Local. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Thanks for being here for a special local election episode. After a truncated lightning round of this month's top stories, we'll have a panel discussion about all things local election with tenants' rights activist Ryan Bell and Pasadena Chamber of Commerce CEO Paul Little. After that, Barry Gordon and Peter Dreyer return to NewsRap to discuss national politics, so stay tuned after our local discussion for that. Let's turn first to our lightning round of news updates. 1. The Pasadena City Council voted 5-1 with one abstention to appoint Justin Jones as John Kennedy's replacement in District 3 over Pastor Lucius Smith and previous District 3 candidate Brandon Lamar. Jones is an engineer who works for LA County. He was raised in District 3 and recently moved back to the district. Jones will serve until December 12th, after which the City Council must make another appointment for that seat, which could be Jones again or someone else. That appointee will serve on the council until 2024. Which is when District 3 voters will get to next weigh in on who they want their council representative to be. 2. New City Council Manager Miguel Marquez said the search for the new Pasadena Police Chief has been whittled down to a list of 3 finalists. A decision is expected to be made in mid-November. At the recent Civilian Police Oversight Commission meeting, members expressed concern that the commission hasn't been part of that selection process. They requested to Marquez that the city find a way to include the commission, but Marquez replied by saying the commission already provided input when they met with the recruiter back in May. Last month, Marquez told NewsRap Local that part of the criteria for selecting the police chief is a willingness and openness to working with the independent police auditor and the Civilian Police Oversight Commission. 3. A state auditor said the city of Pasadena continues to experience moderate risk of financial distress, which it has since 2016. Quote, this city's projected annual payments to its CalPERS pension plan in fiscal year 2028 to 29 are significant compared to its current total government revenues, end quote, according to the state auditor. Marquez said that the city of Pasadena's financial picture overall remains healthy and solvent, with strong reserves and a balanced budget, even when these pension payments are taken into account. The report said that, quote, residents may experience the continuation of essential services such as fire, police, road maintenance, and parks. However, the city may need to increase revenue or reduce services or other expenses to deal with a major economic event such as a recession. This city should carefully evaluate its financial position in order to ensure that it is prepared for unforeseen challenges and does not become distressed in the future, end quote. 4. The 2023 Rose Parade Grand Marshal is Gabby Giffords. Excellent choice. Giffords, of course, is the former congressional representative from Arizona who survived being shot in the head at point-blank range in 2011 and has gone on to become a staunch gun control advocate. Her husband is Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, up for re-election right now against Republican Blake Masters. The Rose Parade will take place on Monday, January 2nd, because the Tournament of Roses doesn't hold the parade on New Year's Day if it falls on a Sunday. And 5. The city said it could take 10 years to develop the 50 acres known as the 710 stub that Caltrans recently relinquished to the city, along with a $5 million payment. An outreach process to determine the area's future land use, transportation network, and utility infrastructure is now underway, and it could take 3 years to develop the city's vision for the area and figure out how to fund the project, including determining whether to fill in the ditch and then develop on top of the new land. The council will soon appoint a task force to work through these issues. Outgoing council member and Vice Mayor Andy Wilson asked city staff to think of ways to use the space during that decade, such as tiny homes for the unhoused. It is unclear if the city will have to pay for the land if it is used for other uses besides the transportation hub it currently is, for example, housing, open space, or retail, as other cities in similar situations have had to do. Let's patch in our guests for our special local election discussion today, Ryan Bell and Paul Little. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ryan Bell serves as the Southern California Regional Organizer for Tenants Together, a statewide tenants' rights nonprofit, and as the Finance Director for the Pasadena for Rent Control campaign. He ran for Pasadena City Council's District 6 seat in 2020. Paul Little previously served on the Pasadena City Council for District 2 and on the board of the LA to Pasadena Metro Construction Authority. He also worked as a public relations and communications consultant in the private sector, and he currently serves as the president and CEO of the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce. So, gentlemen, ballots are in the mail and voting is underway through November 8th. There are a number of local, county, state measures on Pasadena ballots, as well as POSD races, congressional races. Even Governor Newsom is back on the ballot. let's start hyperlocal and special library tax, Measure L. It's a continuation of a $41 annual parcel tax that will generate 20% of the library's budget, or $2.8 million over 15 years. It will maintain library branches, provide books and youth reading programs, other services. First approved overwhelmingly by voters in 1993 and subsequently 2 more times since then. Paul, the Chamber of Commerce supports this measure. Would this have any adverse effect on the business community if L doesn't pass? Does a weakened library system have ripple effects to other areas of the community?
Well, I know, like, for example, we get a lot of calls with people asking for information. We have a lot of information, but when we don't, we send them to the research desk at the library because they can find everything. And you can also find information about tax rates, how to set up a business. It's a very helpful institution, whether you actually go in the door or not. So I think it could have some negative impact on the business community, but the other thing I think is that the library is a valued institution in Pasadena, and I think having diminished services, which may not, the city could backfill the money, but having a diminished service, or just the idea that the library is not going to be funded the way that it needs to be, I think has a kind of an emotional impact on the community, and what we stand for and who we are. The great story is that when they designed the Civic Center, they built the library first. And because the library was that important at the time, there may not be as much of a need to check out books and all of that, but the expertise that the people have in the library and the collections they have and the history there is very important, I think, to the entire community.
And Ryan, this tax, which is not a new tax, requires 2/3 of voters to approve it to keep it going. Do you think it'll reach that threshold this time? And what happens if it doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably will. It's the 3rd time it's been renewed, or at least we're attempting to renew it this 3rd time. I see yes on L signs. I don't see any no campaign really anywhere. I suppose there may be the Howard Jarvis tax people probably are opposing it, but they aren't. Oh, okay, interesting.
No, it's under their radar, I think.
Yeah, okay. So, there's no real opposition. I agree with Paul. I think, libraries are, ancient institutions that have been part of, our development as humans. And, the library serves, I think, most of all the lower income members of our community, students, who will go to the library to do research, maybe that isn't included in their school library. I've spent countless hours in libraries over the years doing my own research for academic pursuits, as well as just, my personal enjoyment. I love books. I love buying books. I see a lot of books behind you, Justin, but I've run out of shelf space at my house and my apartment. But yeah, I think to not have a fully funded library is really not a good look, for the city of Pasadena. And I think pretty much everyone here agrees.
Yeah, and hopefully they get the central library up and running soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's also a relatively small tag on everybody's property tax. It's not a huge amount.
Right, it's minimal, yeah. And so we have a couple of new incoming city council members. So Ryan, what do you think of the council's choice for District 3, Justin Jones, and how that went down? And do you expect them to reappoint him in December, because they have to make a second appointment?
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed. I think I don't live in District 3. I used to live in District 3. I was actually evicted from my apartment in District 3 in 2017 without cause. But I know a lot of people that live there. I read all those letters that were sent in, some 89 letters, and all the public comments and the campaign that that Brandon ran. I really felt like it was going to be hard for them not to appoint him, given the public support that he had. And on top of the fact that Justin just changed his voter registration to his uncle's house like a few weeks before the appointment, and has really never cast a ballot in recent years or maybe ever in District 3. So I thought it was a really controversial move for them to try to evaluate how Justin would fit into the existing council versus evaluate what the voters of District 3 would want. It's certainly within their right to do what they did. There's nothing illegal about it, but it definitely soured an already kind of sour view of the city government from Northwest Pasadena residents. I serve on the Northwest Commission and hear a lot of issues coming from the Northwest, and this certainly didn't do anything to improve those relations.
Well, except that Brandon had not been elected when he ran for the city council. He lost an election. So I have just met Justin recently at a social event. So, and I'm not in District 3 either. I think the council made the decision the council made for the reasons the council made it. Having been there, sometimes you just make a decision because you think it's the right thing. I can't second guess it. I wish the system were different, because it would be really nice to have an election for the district, as opposed to appoint someone now and then reappoint or appoint someone else in December. And the council could do any of those things, when they have to in December or after December. I think the better thing would have been, had there been a requirement for an election that could have been running 3 weeks from now. There was enough time to actually do that. But the charter doesn't allow it. So
maybe the charter should be updated. It seems like there were some gaps here in the charter for this kind of situation. Paul, how's this going to shake up the council dynamic with a couple of new members coming on?
It's always very interesting to watch the personal dynamics. Having been there for 12 years, been a newbie when I first started, and then have some new folks come along after that. The personal dynamics always change. I don't know that the political dynamics will change. Really, the outlook of the council, we have a pretty progressive council in Pasadena, and I think that's going to remain. So I don't see decisions changing. Deliberations may change some, and things may change a little bit here and there, but I don't see big changes in the decisions the council's making. And I mean, like I said, I met Justin once. He seems like a fairly reasonable, even-keeled kind of a person. I don't know that the dynamics will change much with him. And I've met Jason, and he seems also, not to be incendiary, shall we say, or antagonistic. But you never know what's going to happen when someone's sitting up there on the dais either.
And Ryan, what are the most important issues that the new city council and the new city manager are going to have to tackle in the new year?
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't presume to know all of the most important issues, but certainly toward the top of that list is going to be the hiring of the new police chief, and then introducing that person to the community. And we've barely met the city manager, so there's a lot of new folks here. It takes time. I've had folks complain that somebody that was running for an elected office had only lived in Pasadena 18 years. And I was like, that seems like a long time to me. I mean, that seems like a long enough time to run for office. I ran for office when I had only lived here 7 years. Some probably thought that was a little too soon, but
I was 9.
Yours was 9. I mean, Justin's only lived in his district a month, so that's apparently okay. So Pasadena has a very intense feeling about how long someone's been here, and for a brand new chief and a brand new city manager, I think it's going to take some time. And so I think those are important issues. The Rose Bowl is obviously a big problem in terms of the debt there and how to resolve that, and I know that nobody wants to sell the naming rights, and so that's kind of a contentious issue that I confess that I'm not that invested in. And, there's always the ongoing issues of, the Arroyo and jobs, and, cost of living issues. I mean, I think things are just getting more and more expensive. And we'll talk about this later, but from where I sit, I just see people struggling, and the main issues that we're addressing are not really addressing the issues of those that are really hurting in this community. Schools closing, and economic crisis, still rippling through Pasadena.
I would agree. Economics is going to be a big one. I don't envy the city managers. The chair's not even warm, and he has to hire a police chief. In a community that's very engaged with the issues from all sorts of sides, but also very close to the police department. The police department is here. It's not the sheriff's department, which seems like this monolith, or the LAPD. It is our police department. So I think that's difficult, but indications are there's going to be a recession in 2023. Not a 2008 level one, but something. And Ryan mentioned inflation. Interestingly enough, spending's been up over the last year or so with the pandemic, but because people banked money during the pandemic, they had nothing to spend money on. But that's going to start running out. And so I think the spending levels are going to drop back down as people have less money. And so I think that's going to have a big impact here on everybody. I mean, the cost of living is going up, but also if it means fewer jobs, if it means fewer opportunities for folks, and there are a lot of issues around that as well that need to be addressed somehow. There are fewer childcare centers now than there were at the beginning of the pandemic, which means somebody can't go to work; they have to stay home with the kids. Those kind of things ripple through the economy. And I mean, the Rose Bowl is an issue, but it's one they're going to have to resolve somehow. But I think, I mean, there are huge income inequality issues here in Pasadena that I don't know how we address as a city. It's a societal issue, I think. That I think that I think somehow needs to be addressed. It's having more jobs, having better jobs, having higher paying jobs, having jobs with a future for entry level folks. All of those kind of things, along with how much does it cost today to buy a gallon of gas.
And of course, housing is also a big issue. So let's talk about Measure H, rent control. We've had a bit of back and forth with letters to the editor of Pasadena Now in a week or two. This, of course, will amend the Pasadena City Charter and limit annual rent increases for multifamily rental units built before 1995 to 75% of the Consumer Price Index, limit evictions to just causes only, and establish a rental housing board that would determine rent adjustments, adopt and oversee rules and regulations, and maintain a citywide rental housing registry. So, Paul, the Chamber of Commerce weighed in on this. They oppose Measure H. Why is that, and why did the Chamber decide to weigh in on this issue?
Well, I have a no on H sign in my front yard. Basically because rent control doesn't work. Ryan will argue the opposite, and I understand that. But it really does not work. If you look at the highest cost rental cities in the country, half of them have rent control, including Santa Monica, which is 30 miles that way. It does not suppress rent costs. In fact, it drives them up, especially for market rate and for rent controlled apartments when they could become vacant. So we end up with a situation like Santa Monica, New York. The other thing you have is less development of housing in a community, and also you have a deterioration of the units that are rent controlled. My son lives in a rent controlled apartment in Brooklyn. Good for him. He's in a 1-bedroom top floor apartment in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. but the floor's coming up in his kitchen and his landlord's not going to fix it. If the roof leaks, the landlord will fix it. If a window's broken, the landlord will fix it. If the plumbing's leaking or the electricity's out, the landlord will fix it. Anything else, it's up to you. My son had to fix the cabinets in his kitchen himself, which is a good thing he's handy and knows how to do that. I couldn't do it. But the rental housing stock that is rent controlled, becomes deteriorated, and the value of those rent controlled apartments drop. The value of the buildings drop, and it really is ineffective. And there are close to 6,500 units in Pasadena that aren't subject to rent control, and they're all the ones that people think are the big downtown apartment buildings. None of those buildings really are subject to rent control because of Costa-Hawkins, which prohibits rent control on anything built since 1995, I think. So there's a whole lot of reasons and more, but it really just, quite frankly, does not work.
And Ryan, why do you think this measure is needed in Pasadena right now?
Well, I mean, first of all, it just simply isn't true that it doesn't work. I mean, the objective analysis that was commissioned by City Council and written up by an organization called Management Partners says, empirical research, this is a quote, empirical research indicates rent regulations have been effective at achieving two of their primary goals: maintaining below market rent levels for regulated units and moderating price appreciation. So that is the goal of rent control, and it absolutely works. Even the Stanford paper that people love to quote indicates that rent regulation in San Francisco kept rents below market rate for folks who were at danger of being displaced. Rents are going up at 10% right now. We at the Tenants Union, we get calls multiple times a week of tenants, and we always ask, do you live in multifamily housing? And if they do, as often as not, the whole building got 10% rent increases, which amounts to, there's an article in the LAist about the campaign today. And, it quotes a couple of folks. One's a senior who just got $140 rent increase. She can't go out and find a second job, as a senior citizen. People don't hire, people in their 60s and 70s for, the kinds of jobs that she would need to make enough money to make it worth it. And she doesn't know where to go. The waiting list on affordable housing developments is a mile long, and she's going to get priced out. The campaign's been endorsed by Union Station Homeless Services, and they quite rightly see it as homeless prevention. People in Pasadena that are unhoused right now most of them, the vast majority of them, I think over 60% of them, were previously housed in Pasadena, which means they just couldn't stay in their housing as a result of primarily economic issues. That the annual homeless count documents this year after year after year. There are laws in place that require landlords to maintain their properties. And, every argument I hear against rent control is basically some version of landlords are just bad people. Like, they're going to punish you for having rent control. It's not that the rent control measure forces people to not maintain their units. Right now, units aren't being maintained right now. Every day we get at least one email or phone call, the Tenants Union, from tenants who are suffering with habitability issues in their units. It doesn't take rent control for landlords to neglect their properties. That's happening right this minute. And that's why the rent board is so important, because tenants can appeal to the rent board and document these habitability concerns. And the rent board will have the authority to lower rent for those tenants until the landlord fixes the problem. Likewise, if the landlord has a capital outlay or some unexpected large expenses related to their business, they can also appeal to the rent board for an upward adjustment of rent. And the rent board would be obliged under state law to give that upward adjustment in rent, because landlords are guaranteed by constitutional law, state law, years of case law, to a fair return on their investment. So nothing that we could do with Measure H or any other measure could ever impinge upon a landlord's right to earn a fair return on their investment. Not just their expenses, but their profits too are guaranteed by constitutional law. So, with rent spiking and evictions, we had a case where 2 management companies in July were trying to force out 100 units of tenants for no cause, under alleged renovations that they were going to do. And this was, prohibited by a county measure, and we pushed back, and those landlords dropped those, rescinded those eviction notices. But landlords are constantly trying to evict people for no cause and like harass them into leaving. It's a really dire situation out there. And I wish that folks would come and spend a day or two on our hotline and talk to tenants about what they're going through. And I think people would really see a different picture.
Paul, we're out of time, but really quickly, if not rent control, what can be done to make Pasadena a more affordable place to live?
Well, I mean, we actually need to build subsidized housing. Really, that's what needs to happen. There needs to be more housing at below market rates. And redevelopment was taken away, which was the big funding mechanism for that. We have inclusionary housing, which, Ryan, you don't know this, but I brought that to Pasadena when I was on the city council. The planning director's hair stood on end when I mentioned it, but 7 years later, it was in place. But Pasadena at least has some mechanism. It's not enough. But really what needs to happen is there need to be units that are affordable. And the only way to make units affordable is to subsidize the construction of those units, because the cost to build units is so high. So that would help. The rent control board that Ryan talked about is just a mess. The whole idea of an unaccountable, unelected, you can't remove people from the board. There's no mechanism to remove people from the board.
Yes, there is a recall mechanism in the measure, and it's appointed by city council. People can be recalled. There doesn't even have to be a recall vote. Signatures alone will merit a recall.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It's in the measure. Read it. It's in the measure.
Okay. I'll take your word for that. But even so, it's a group that can tax landlords as they want. And basically set, they could, put me on the board. I'll take 40 grand a year to sit in a few meetings a month. It's not complicated as to why there are problems with it, but
it's not a tax either, because we only need 50% plus one.
Well, it is a tax. You're just calling it something else. The other whole problem with this, if it passes, it's going to be litigated for years anyway, because they're going to argue all of those things. I really wish it worked, but it doesn't. But there are solutions out there, but it takes money, and it takes the government, not just the city, but the state and the feds, to actually invest in affordable housing, so that all of those people who need to remain in their houses, in their homes, can. There are mechanisms. The city just doesn't necessarily use them, or doesn't have the money for them.
Well, we unfortunately have to leave it there, but thank you both so much for coming on the show. I hope you'll both come back maybe after the election. We can continue whichever way it goes, talk about the implications from there. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about this important election.
Okay.
Thanks,
it's always
Justin.
nice to see you. Nice to see you, Ryan.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Justin, and nice to meet you, Paul. Okay, take care.
Thank you, guys.